because it is so really labor intensive and so, really expensive, and you don't want to do that work twice. So during this, so what do I want us to accomplish over the next few days? I want answers to your questions, and Ivy, I want to thank her for working with me to really, try to get questions and things sort of on the table so I would sort of know where, people are coming from. But I want people to have answers where, you feel you need to have answers, and so you're equipped to go out and represent us, in the proper way. I want also information back, because we can do a much better job of sharing information. I'm interested in raising money, because all of this takes money. And so that's probably where 90% of my time right now is done. All my focus, even the little schemes and things I come up with, the latest being sponsor HistoryMaker, which Amy and I have been going back and forth on. It's a scheme because this, it sort of pisses me off. What's that project? What is the project that they're doing? The booths and train stations. What is that?
Story project.
StoryCorps. StoryCorps got funded by $2 million by the same foundations that won't give us any money. And so I was really I'm big on not bashing StoryCorps because I don't want to bash any other project. But I want to have our rightful place, and I can't understand how the same funding agencies will fund that and not, fund us. So we have to really build our development effort here, and it has to get beyond me, as a single person to do that. So I'm trying really to find a development person to bring on and someone to do grant writing and hope that we can sort of move in that direction. But most of our money, and why there is such a focus on events around here, is that most of our money we're living probably 90% off of events right now, which is a horrible place to be. We have to, ramp up the individual giving, and we have to ramp up the grants. But it's, it's a horrible place to be right now. But on the other end, I try not to be so hard, because when you're going into a new market, and Amy, as I was like, forget it, every new market I've got to, I don't want to date them. Like each new market I think, oh, this is fabulous. I like Atlanta. I like DC. I like it better than Chicago. And then I'm like, they sit me down and they're like, as we're planning an event, DC is not like Chicago. Okay, what does that mean? Atlanta is not like DC or Chicago. And I'm thinking, if I have to hear this every market, I'm going to go crazy. But the thing is that what I've found, though, out here is tremendous excitement for the project that we're doing, and people want to really get behind it, and they see the uniqueness in it. And frankly, we're the largest now in the country. We've outdistanced any collection. It took the Schomburg 20 years to build their 300 interviews, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum took them 10 years to build their base of interviews. And, and it only took, Howard Dotson, we were presenting together, and I had never presented with him, and I was sort of, excited. And when he turned to show a clip on Cannonball Adderley, he sort of looked over at me and he says, this sort of pales in comparison to the HistoryMakers. And I was like, oh my goodness, because I always, talk about him and, sort of awe. But I talk about the Schomburg that way because its collection outdistances anything that you'll find in the size of the collection, anything that you'll find in the Library of Congress and in the Smithsonian. I talk often about, someone was asking me last night, what was one of my favorite interviews, and I don't, I have different favorites for different reasons, but it caused me to think about Warren Marr, who founded the Amistad collection, and I remember I literally was in tears during that, interview as he was describing how he came about starting Amistad, how the idea came to him, what he did in his early years. It's very, very, it's like we are a carbon copy of that, but that is the largest paper archive. They have a very significant collection of paper records of African Americans, and I've always encouraged people, if they were giving their paper records away, to give them to Amistad. So back to, enough of going off on tangents, back to what is important. I said ethics are really important, that we, that we communicate together, and I mean communicate with a single voice out there, so the message will be clear. And there are people that want to work with us on our messaging. There's been a lot of talk about that, of how to succinctly state, what we are and what we do so people get it. So it's something they will support. Recently, here in Chicago, much to my dismay, someone said that we were elitist. And and Larry said, "Oh, I've heard that too." That we were elitist and not sort of esoteric, and that if we talked about education, they didn't really see it. So that was much to my dismay. Mainly because we're known for our Evening With programs. That was a brainchild of a man named Michael Hall, who was the most senior person at Leo Burnett. Who in the early years of the project was, meeting with me and encouraging me to just go out and, do something. So I came up with the Evening With project thinking that, that would be representative storytelling, and found that I don't know if it's our best market. It makes a small, unique sort of fundraiser for us, and we've done 3 of them this year. But I really, I think our heart and soul lies more with our, education institute in many ways, and that'll be more palatable for people really understanding, and making it tangible for people. So I want us to be able to speak with one, voice, and I want also for us to be able to fine-tune our process and to do really good interviews to the extent that's humanly possible. We can't be perfect, but we can really give it a good try. And so at this sharing of information back and forth, in terms of how do we communicate. Shawn came up to me last night and said, "Look, they gave me good marks for Elizabeth Catlett." I was so panicked about Elizabeth Catlett. Here's someone, I have been wanting to interview for like years and never had thought that we would get her interview. And so I was, hard on Shawn. But I was also saying that, I wanted him to come to the interview with information. There's a lot of information about her. And we should honor people by, coming to the interview with having read about them and know as much about them, because people, are insulted. I mean, they're taking time out of their schedule. It's not insignificant amount of time, asking someone 3 or 4 hours, that's not insignificant. And if you sit up there not knowing, they can, people can detect it. The other thing is just fine-tuning our process. What is a good oral history interview? What are the questions we need to ask? How do the teams work, good together? How do you communicate back here with the home office? How does the home office support you? How do we do that in an efficient manner? Because it's not like we have teams of people. How do we do that? And how do we leave a good impression? And I have to say this, though people have heard from me when there have been problems, but really I would say in 99% of our cases we come across, people are happy, with the job that we're doing. And I want to say thank you to everyone, who has, done that. So, so with that, I think, I want to be, yes?
I just wonder, when it's appropriate, if we could just do one more sweet.
That's what I'm getting ready to do. That's what I was going to do. So I'd like to have everyone, just like Amy says, I want everyone to sort of introduce themselves and maybe just say a little bit about their background, and then we're going to turn it over to the project fellows.
Okay, are you starting with me?
Yeah.
My name is Melissa. I've been a project fellow since April, and my background, I guess how I got in the door here, was I majored in anthropology and sociology with a thematic in Africa and the African diaspora. I spent a semester at Spelman College as part of my college experience, and about 9 months in Cameroon.
What's your last name?
Minor.
Evelyn Pounds, interviewer for the Atlanta area. I have a history in genealogy and an interest in history. And I guess that's how I got here. I didn't mention that I met Larry at a conference in March, and that was when I was actually introduced to the HistoryMakers, and that's when I contacted Julieanna to start the interviewing process.
Larry Crowe. I'm an interviewer with the HistoryMakers. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, as I said, where I went to school. And I was lucky in school to have great mentors. Dr. Yvonne Sion, who's now in Maryland, was one of my mentors. She's an expert on negritude. And when I met her, she was excited about, she had been the secretary of the Engel Dam project in Zaire, which is in Congo. And she's an expert on negritude, the French, the African right is a French expression, African and Caribbean rights. We opened the Billingsley Black Cultural Center at Wright State with a tremendous group of people. David Driscoll was there. It's the first time I heard the history of black art was on that opening day. So I was driving the van, it was in the winter time, mid-December. I've got Alex Haley, David Driscoll, the ambassador from Ghana in this van and stuff. This is my introduction. This is something that I dreamt of and petitioned the university for, and got it. And here, so this set me on the course of discovering something about our history and culture. I take it very seriously. I've done it all my life. And when I came to Chicago, I came here at the invitation of Hickey Matabuti for the Third World Press because it was an independent black press. I was part of an independent black school, and we had a food co-op and a bookstore. Black Books Bulletin magazine were published in it. That's, so, and we had a lecture series, and I was in charge of the lecture series. I'd bring in Lou Palmer, Vernon Jarrett, the local people, and people like Maulana Karinga, Farrakhan, when he finally reemerged after the death of Elijah Muhammad. He spoke there first, people from, all over the poet Sonia Sanchez, Mari Evans. I cooked dinner for Mari Evans one night. But I'm used to meeting the people involved in African history and culture, not business people. She always criticized me for. This is, a succession of low-paying jobs for black organizations has led me to this, which is very similar in some ways. But it's so that's a little bit about me. I did some television production in college, but I've been a member of a lot of different historical organizations. I said I met Evelyn, as she said, at the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, which was founded by the late Dr. Jacob Crowe from Chicago, who was a great friend of mine. John Henry Clark was a part of that when he was alive. So that's something I love the Schomburg Center. I go to New York, I have the same love for it that you do. One of the librarian that's been there the longest is from Dayton, Sharon Howard. I always go there and get her to help me find something. She's been very helpful in this project every time I've been in New York. But it's just, that's a little bit more about me. That's go on to Paul Brock. he could fill up the next hour.
Well, I can only preach that. I won't preach this morning. I'm Paul Brock. My background is as a journalist, filmmaker. Three films I'd like to specifically mention. One, Denmark BC. I starred Yaphet Kotto as Denmark BC leaders. Reverend Casey, number of other Roz Cash. And that was directed by Stan Lathan, who is a history maker.
You can't hear. You can't hear.
Oh, can't hear? Okay. That's usually not my problem, man, but I'll speak louder. I was speaking about the films that I had made as a producer. One was Denmark BC with Roz Cash, Annette Beatty, Yaphet Kotto as Denmark BC, Bernie Casey. Stan Lathan directed. Antonio Fargas played the head of the Gullahs. The second film was directed by Gordon Parks. Solomon Northup, true story of a free slave living in upstate New York. When he went on tour, music tour, he was the only African American. His other two music companions were white. Since they had not made any money by the time they got to Washington, D.C., they sold him into slavery to make some money, and he remained a slave in Louisiana for 11 years. Solomon Northup, what was his name, and Gordon and Reuben Cannon, who cast the language, insisted on using a person who had never acted before but had a good voice in the lead role, and I argued against it, but lost that argument. His name was Avery Brooks, and he's done a couple of after that, and Charles Branham was talking about the Sea Isles last night, and all of these were done for American Playhouse, by the way, PBS, and all of them won awards. That was about Charlotte Fortin. Many of you may or may not know the name. Charlotte Fortin came out of a family back in the 1840s. Her father was one of the richest men in Philadelphia, multi-millionaire. She was able to talk Abraham Lincoln at the opening of the Civil War, that her and some Quakers going down to South Carolina to teach slaves read and write. But first they had to teach them to run off so the plantations would fail, and the Union would have a better chance of winning the Battle of South Carolina. Did that story. That was Glenn Tyman, Melba Moore playing Charlotte Fortin, and of course they succeeded. And that all of those Sea Isles, what is now Hilton Head, all went to runaway slaves. All of that land. The U.S. has since taken it all back and given it to other folks. But those were the three we did for American Playhouse. We did work for Tony Brown for a number of years, and we did a film called The White Girl. White Girl referred to heroin addicts and so forth. And then several smaller features I did for Warner Brothers under contract with Warner Brothers. Most of my career after that, I believe, was event planning. I was Deputy Director of Communications with the Democratic National Committee. And currently, through Amy, took a great interest in meeting Julieanna Richardson and becoming involved in the project here. That's how I'm here, because of Julieanna and Amy Billingsley.
He now lives in Maryland, not far from our
Right,
Maryland office.
right up the road from there.
I'm Amy Billingsley. I'm the History Maker Coordinator for Mid-Atlantic. I have always been interested in history, and I'm not going to talk long, but I've always been interested in history, and one of the, especially so when we were in Berkeley, California, and Alex Haley used to come and sit in the mid-60s, sit in our living room and talk about, his roots story and that kind of thing. And so that sort of led me into doing some roots work with my own parentage, which is fascinating, and I won't go into that. But the other thing, I've been at Berkeley, and my Andrew Billingsley, who I was married to for quite a while, was Vice President of Academic Affairs at Howard in the early 70s, and then President of Morgan. And then we've just, so as part of that, I was able to introduce him to a lot of the cultural icons in our country, and so I've known a lot of those, which has been wonderful. John Killens, Ossie and Ruby, just a lot of different people, which have been fascinating. And so one of the things that I love to do is network, and so the networking is particularly useful, I think, with History Makers. So we just had an office. We've just set up an office in Largo, Maryland, which is right outside of D.C., which offers us lots of possibilities. So we're looking forward to having a vibrant, with Ngina, looking forward to having a vibrant volunteer group, doing salons, and maybe even doing some public events at some point, in addition to education. So we're excited about the future. She's doing way back there.
My name is Sonia Nelson, and I'm a project fellow, and I started with the HistoryMakers in January 2005, the start of the new year. I graduated from Northwestern in June 2004 with a degree in English, and my specialty was speculative fiction, like science fiction and fantasy. So I guess I'm most interested in the way that history affects futures and that whole dynamic.
I'm Tyler. I also
Tyler what?
Barnett. Sorry, I'm a project fellow, and I actually graduated from Northwestern in Sonia's class. I was an American Studies major, and I concentrated in African American culture, which was kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of literature, history, and sociology courses. And I ended up writing a senior thesis about Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey. I found some songs that they had composed together and kind of focused on the sexual and racial politics in those songs. And it's really rewarding. I was really happy to get this opportunity. I'm kind of thinking of it as continuing my education, except this time I'm getting paid. So. But I've been happy to be here, and it's pretty fantastic.
I'm Tawanna Streater, and I am Julieanna's executive assistant. My background is in public relations and arts management. And while I was in grad school, I wanted to focus on the nonprofit sector, and that's what I did after I graduated. And a volunteer introduced me to the HistoryMakers.
I am Jessie Engel. I am a scheduler here at HistoryMakers, coming on 2 months now. I was born and raised here in Chicago. I attended Boston University for 2 years and then transferred and graduated from Loyola University, Chicago. I have a degree in sociology with sort of an informal concentration in oral history and ethnography. Most of my work experience includes community work here in Chicago, specifically adult education as well as child advocacy, and I also have experience in television and film production as well. So I found that working here for the HistoryMakers is kind of a combination of my interests, so I hoped I might have something to lend.
My name is Mike Downey. I've been a project fellow since January of this year. I'm from the area, graduated from Illinois State in 2000 with a background in communications and broadcast production. From there I went on to the WPA Film Library, which is in Orland Park. And that was kind of my introduction to film and video archives and research of the footage. Was there for about 4 years, and then through Cheri Pugh, who is kind of the leader of our project fellow group, kind of came here through her, and I'm really enjoying and learn more than, yeah, this is like Tyler said, a continuation of education. It's opened my eyes and a lot of opportunities, I think.
I am Ivy Jackson. I was the scheduler. Now I don't really have a title. I'm just working on all the little projects Julieanna throws at me. I've been here for over a year, and I have a background in journalism and production.
My name is Viola Henry, and I'm born here in Chicago and live here.
I didn't catch your name, sorry.
Viola Henry.
Thank you.
And I'm a freelance videographer. I'm currently working with a nonprofit organization called the Great Black Music Project, which is housed at Northeastern University Jacob H. Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies. I'm a child of the 60s. I've always been interested in African history and our culture. I have a master's degree from Northeastern University in Inner City Studies, which is primarily African history. I also have been involved with ASCAC and the Kemetic Institute that I volunteer and do their archiving as well. And I have a background in television production from Columbia College.
My name is Shawn Wilson. I'm originally from Mississippi. I now live in New York City. I'm an interviewer for the HistoryMakers. And I first came across oral histories in my hometown of Mississippi at the public library. I was impressed at how much you could learn about your own history through oral history. So it's a pleasure for me to be working on this project and sort of continuing that and being a really big part of making it happen. And I love the art of storytelling, so I'm very pleased to be a part of the project.
I'm Matthew Hickey, videographer, always. I've been with the project from the very beginning, and very proud to have been with the project from the very beginning. I've worked with Julieanna on several projects even before the HistoryMakers, and I've been happy to work with her. I really love the project, and want to see it continue and grow. So,
Have camera will travel.
My name is Ed Anderson. I'm an interviewer in the Atlanta office. As I indicated last night, I first became aware of HistoryMakers as a result of meeting a former executive with the Association of Negro Life and Culture at a Christmas party. And I became very interested in the project and made contact with Julieanna after many efforts, but I knew it was something I wanted to be involved in because I've always been interested in history, although I never majored in history, even with 3, almost 4 degrees. Just history and genealogy has always been of interest to me. In fact, I can remember as a youngster wanting to know who all the relatives were. And I indicated last night I'm somewhat of a semi-pro genealogist, for I've traced the family in one instance back to the 1799, in most instances back to the 1830s, 40s, on every branch of the family. I spent a career in the Army, first as a line officer, then because of an Army program as an attorney, where I was pointed mostly in the area of criminal law. Resultantly, upon retiring, chose not to practice law, but rather to get involved at the early part of the lives of many youngsters. My own sons were becoming young men, and I had unfortunately prosecuted or defended many young African American people throughout my military career, and didn't want to have anything to do with that anymore. So I began work on a doctorate at Clark Atlanta University after completing a seminary degree part-time at ITC, and really wanted to get immersed in the lives of young people, and I did. I spent almost 11 years in the public school system in Atlanta, and believe we made I think we made an impact. From there, I moved to the Christian school sector and spent the last 4 years plus as principal of a Christian elementary school, Green Forest, which grew to be the largest predominantly African American Christian school in the nation. And I gave that up last summer, especially after I found out about HistoryMakers and decided that's what I really wanted to do for the foreseeable future. Throughout my military career, I took advantage of every opportunity to get as close to Africa or in Africa as I could, because I've always, as I indicated, been interested not only in genealogy, but my roots in Africa. And so I've had the opportunity to visit Egypt, Morocco, Israel, and throughout the Middle East, and also Senegal. And I think that's, oh yes, I spent many years working with the Boy Scouts of America movement, probably about 20 years altogether, and probably can claim responsibility for assisting as many as probably 20 young men earn the rank of Eagle Scout, which positions them for quite a bit more in life, to include my own 2 sons, fortunately. I'm a student of Larry. Larry's my primary mentor, I guess. Julieanna, of course, is a mentor, but I learned much from him. I've learned that I really am a Pan-Africanist. Not to the extent that Larry is, but I learned a lot from him, as I do with anyone I come in contact with. I think I'll stop there. I love working with HistoryMakers, and I really look forward to all that it offers in the future. Yes.
Expand the circle some more.
Yeah, please.
I am Ngina Jackson. I am new to the HistoryMakers. I'm joining the team. I will be joining to help start up the DC office, which is located in Largo, Maryland. I have a background in journalism, and I'm really looking forward to working with HistoryMakers and making an impact.
Hi, I'm Loretta Henry. I was born in Dayton, Ohio. My background, I was a history government major in college. I taught school, elementary school for 1,000 years. We always do. Oh, good. Thank you. That's what, when we're working with little children, keeps you young. We always do an oral history project. You know, we have them interview their families about their own personal history to tie it in with, you know, American history or state, whatever the history we're studying. I love oral history. I love it, I love it, I love it. I'm into genealogy also. I traced my one branch back to the 1500s, believe it or not. Yes, it's pretty amazing. Mostly to the 1830s. Let's see, what else? Oh, I met Julieanna. We lived next door to each other when we were teenagers. She graduated same school as my husband, so that's where the connection comes in.
My name is Bob Hayden, and I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, but I currently live on Martha's Vineyard. And Martha's Vineyard is an island, 45-minute ferry ride from Falmouth, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. I'll continue by, I guess, responding to a question that Ed asked me last night. I think I mentioned in my talk last night, I've done 19 books on African American history. But let me say I started out as a biochemist. I majored in biology and chemistry way back, and thought that I wanted to be a research scientist. Really wanted to get into the laboratory and do that kind of work. But in my last 2 years of college, I realized that I had to take some sociology and psychology and, you know, that distribution that you have to have. And all of a sudden I decided I wanted to work with people. I wanted to work with people. I didn't want to be in a lab. And so I decided, well, the best way to work is to teach science. And I wanted to go into the public school system. So I went ahead and got a master's degree in science education. Began teaching middle and high school science in the early 60s. And I need to tell you that the textbooks in science, chemistry, biology, for students and for teachers, there was nothing in the books on what African Americans had done in science, technology, and medicine. Not even George Washington Carver was covered in the basic science textbooks that were used at the time. So during the 60s, I started to do my own research on African Americans in the scientific and technical fields. And just to jump up quickly, I was very fortunate to be able to have published in 1970 my first book, 7 Black American Scientists. 1972, published 8 Black American Inventors. And 1976, 9 Black American Doctors. These were written for upper elementary, junior and senior high school students. And many of the science textbooks that ultimately came out in the following years used materials and used chapters from my seminal works. And I'm proud to say that I'm probably the first person to do that kind of work and to bring that stuff to the public school system. That's how I got started in history. In 1970, I became the director of the Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity in Boston, Massachusetts. It's better known as METCO, M-E-T-C-O. In the late 60s and the early 70s, in Boston, we began enrolling African American students in suburban school districts. And I became the director of that program in January of 1970. I had 1,100 black children going to 28 suburban school districts every day. I'm the director. I said, we can't just send the students out to the 28 suburban school districts. We've got to change the curriculum. I have been doing my own research in the narrow area, as I said. I decided to go to my first annual meeting of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH. I went to my first meeting in 1970 so that I could begin to learn about our history through the Journal of Negro History and being able to meet John Hope Franklin, Charles Wesley, Rayford Logan, Darlene Clark Hine, Bob Harris, Lorenzo Turner, Hewitt Guinier, So I've been going to the association meetings, and then I was able to bring that material back and use it with my staff to train suburban teachers to bring history into the suburban schools. So this is another venue that I had going for myself and motivating me in the 70s. At the 77th annual meeting of the association, I met Julieanna. She was on a panel. And at that point, I had done close to 800 oral history interviews, okay, just with the tape recorder, not video. Let me say that, if I could just back up, when I started doing my research in my books on blacks in science and technology and medicine, I was out there with a pencil going like this. I didn't even own a tape recorder. So I wasn't even recording, I was just writing it down. But eventually I started to get a tape recorder. I joined the Oral History Association, got trained as an oral historian and certified as an oral historian, but that was way, way back when the art was very new, and it's quite different today. And the guide, by the way, that you put together in the packet is an excellent guide for what we're doing. So that's some of my background. All the oral history that I was doing from the late 60s into the 70s, and even in the 80s and 90s, I always had a project. So I was interviewing a group of people for a particular publication, for a particular project. Let me give you an example. I was very fortunate to be a scholar in residence at the Schomburg, 94, 95. I spent one whole year just researching the life of Dr. Lewis Tompkins Wright, who was the first black doctor at Harlem Hospital. During that year, I lived in Harlem. During that year, I interviewed 84 people in Harlem and Greater New York who had an affiliation with Dr. Wright and Harlem Hospital in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Other doctors, nurses, patients, community people. So 84 interviews helped me to write the book, which came out 3 years ago, called Mr. Harlem Hospital. I've had an extensive teaching career at the collegiate level. Beginning in 1978, I believe I taught the very first course ever offered in a Black Studies program, and that was African Americans in Science, Technology, and Medicine at Northeastern University in Boston. Since 1978, I've been a senior lecturer at 5 Boston universities in African American Studies, and I still have a part-time appointment at University of Massachusetts in Boston. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm kind of a backdoor historian, and I think that our young people need the work that we're doing. I've always been an educator, still have young people in mind, and that's one of the reasons it motivated me to contribute to this project, because of the availability of what we're putting together for elementary, junior, senior high school, and college students. So I think that's enough. There's some more to go around.
My name is Susan Perry, and I'm a project fellow here. In a sense, almost kind of a segue to Mr. Hayden here. I started out with trying to work on a dual degree in nursing and biology at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And my sophomore year, I transitioned into history, largely because as a young child, I was always interested in history. My mother had the American Heritages, and I could just pore over those for hours by myself. And you know, somewhere during my sophomore year, the light bulb came on, saying, you know, why am I going into the sciences? Because history is what I love. And so I got my degree from Mac in history, focusing on the antebellum South and the women's sphere. And it just so happened that my advisor, mentor, wrote many books on Southern history, slavery, the treatment of women, in essence, in the South. And with that degree, I actually fell into a job working in the historic capacity. I actually just finished up 20 years of working at the Art Institute of Chicago in their Art and Architectural History Library. Again, despite the fact that the discipline is different, the history is still there. And so I've actually been with the HistoryMakers since last November. And as I said, working with as a project fellow and going through the interviews, and I'm finding that it's, in a sense, it's helping me as far as my own little hobby on the side. I've been helping my mother do our own family genealogy, and I'm the one who's internet savvy and the one who's, you know, poring over or writing to different historical societies and things and getting literature for her. She's in her mid-70s, and so we're putting our family together. And so this project, in essence, is keeping me focused on what she wants to do and what we all want to do in our family.
I'm Cheri Pugh. My name officially is Cheryl Ann, but I've gone by Cheri since I was small. I studied history at Northwestern, as did some of the other people here, but I was a little earlier than they were. Actually, I focused on European history, but I have been interested also in African American history since I was quite a young child. In fact, mentioning George Washington Carver, I was obsessed with George Washington Carver when I was about 7 years old. I had like a little biography of him. I read like all the biographies. There weren't a lot of biographies of African Americans available, you know, for kids in the 60s, but I read about everything I could get my hands on. And I was also fortunate not to be raised, you know, as a white kid growing up in a rural area in the border of Iowa and Missouri. I feel like I was fortunate not to be raised with the kind of racist beliefs that some of my classmates were, and that I grew up with black neighbors and friends. I liked George Washington Carver because he had, as it told a lot about you know, his childhood, how that he was a plant doctor, and he had a little in the woods. He would take all the sick plants, and I don't know, I was just really fascinated. And then with all the accomplishments he made later, and then he also, you know, he had gone to school in Iowa, and so, you know, that was one thing. But, you know, I always on the side, although my official focus was on modern European history, I was always reading black history at the same time. I worked in the music business for several years after college, and then I used my history and went into film archive. I also worked at, as Mike mentioned, I worked at WPA Film Library, which is in the suburbs here, and one of the only places in the region that does have a cold storage vault. We had an incredible collection of film and video at that place, and I worked there for about 10, 11 years. I spent a lot of time cataloging film footage going back to the 1890s and up through the first half of the century for the most part. But we also had collections like the Soul television series, which is just fabulous stuff, and we looked at some of it here when we were working on the Nikki Giovanni program, because she appeared on there. I also have some experience in film production, documentary production, and I was working on a film and in post-production on that when last October I saw that there was an opening at the HistoryMakers. And as I mentioned to some of the folks who were there last night, I had met Julieanna at a film archivist conference in Los Angeles in 2000 when she was getting started with the HistoryMakers, and she had a lot of questions about cataloging and was just, you know, basically telling me about this incredible idea, this audacious plan that she had to collect an incredible number of oral histories, which is something that has interested me for a long time too. And I had done an oral history of my grandma in her 90s, who hadn't had a very broad experience, and basically, you know, in her 90s she was still living, she could still see the house down the road where she had been born in. But I find that, and I found it so much working at the HistoryMakers as a project fellow and cataloging director, that it's not always the most famous people who have the most fascinating stories, though they also have fascinating stories. But I tend to think anyone's story, if told honestly and directly, it's a window into in the history of the entire country and sometimes the world that is just as valuable as the history from the top up of just the famous people. And so I consider myself fortunate to have a chance to get to see all of these wonderful interviews and to get to work on a project that we're going to be able to make them available to people much more widely than oral histories have been in the past. But we will talk about that some later tomorrow.
I'm Scott Stearns. My background is really in production, from early interest in literature and art and architecture that sort of found its focus in film. And before I came to HistoryMakers, I worked in the Chicago area in film and video and with production companies from other parts of the United States for a number of years, doing camera work and lighting and later on editing. And along the way I started a lighting company, had a 5,000 square foot sound stage not too far from here for about 5 years. And you know, I guess one of the things that I did during this period of time, I worked on a lot of things. I worked on TV commercials, and I worked on features, and I worked on music videos, and I also worked on documentaries. And some of the things that I worked on there's a documentary called Say Amen Somebody by a New York director named George Nierenberg. Worked on that, which was had a lot of focus in Chicago because Thomas Dorsey was here at the time, and Dolores Barrett Campbell and Campbell sisters were here. So I did a lot of work on that with them. Also worked on a documentary called Louie Bluey, directed by Terry Zweigoff. And that was about a musician named Howard Armstrong, who has since become part of our collection here. We've done an interview with him. So it's interesting in some ways how the circle is closed. Shortly before coming here, a couple of years before I started here in 2001, I shot and co-produced a documentary with the local PBS affiliate, WTTW, called Juba. And that was about tap dance. And the Juba Award is named for William Henry Lane, who was one of the earliest real tap dancer in America. And that was interesting because, you know, we interviewed a whole number of people, you know, Van Porter, Prince Spencer, Lady Di Walker, Savion Glover. We did an interview, but he was part of the show that we were doing. And then later on, in connection with the HistoryMakers, a couple of years ago, Larry and I interviewed one of the Nicholas brothers, Bayard Nicholas. So my interest and my background is very much on the production side. It's less historical and maybe more technical and maybe more oriented toward you know, design and images and so on and so forth. But also from the documentary background comes a real interest in narrative and storytelling. And you know, everything that everyone says and what Cheri just said has been very true for me in my experience. Larry and I, Larry started about a year after I did, and I kind of, before Larry came on, I traveled and did a lot of work with Julieanna. She was still doing the lion's share of the interviews at that point in time. So we did a lot of interviews together where I operated camera for her while she was doing the interviews. So I had a really amazing opportunity that I now appreciate even more because I see with the demands on her time how difficult it is for most of us, even me now, to actually spend time with her. She's an amazing interviewer. I mean, all the production background that I've had and the people that I've worked with, she's right up there at the top, you know, the ability to listen and be inquisitive and engage people and establish a rapport. And she brings all of those things too to communicating what the project is, which I learned from her is part of the process. There isn't really a division between meeting someone to do their interview and meeting someone to express what the project is, what its potential is, what its future is. And I know that's one thing that we've all talked about. I know with all of you that I've met out in the field in various situations, and something that's going to be part of this program. But that was, as I look back on it, an extraordinary opportunity to come here at that time. When I came here at the beginning of 2001, they had just a few months before done an evening with Harry Belafonte, which was when Julieanna referenced the brainchild of the man at Burnett, and they were trying to figure out how to introduce and represent the project. And I think there were probably less than 100 or 120 interviews done at that time. In our archive room, we had some of these big folding tables, and the tapes were stacked up on the tables, and then when they overflowed, they were under the table. And you just walk in and go, wow, this is good. But it's amazing to see now all those shelves. And you know, we do have, I don't know if everyone's been told during the tour, but there's a plan that we're going to have to implement as soon as we can get the money together that will take the majority of this space of the room that we're sitting in and create a new archival space that will more than double, almost triple the size, the space volume that we have for storing, you know, the tapes and the. Anyway, not to go too far off on that, but it's been really interesting to me to see how the production and documentary part of it has dovetailed with what we're doing and with the stories. And I guess that's where I jumped off on the tangent, because I was just listening to Cheri talking about a well-told story. And Larry and I are going to talk, I think, tomorrow about a few of the interesting interview examples that we've come across. And it's really a difficult thing to do that because there are so many. Larry and I are in the neighborhood of 600 now that we've done, and probably, you know, maybe 400 of those we've done together. And it's really hard to choose. We just chose a few of them. But you listen to these, and some of them do have this amazing quality. You know, they're like reading the best literature. They're like hearing the most amazing theatrical performance. But they also have this spontaneity and this grounding in reality. There isn't any production behind it. I mean, we set up the camera and the lights and the microphone. It's really just that person there talking at that moment. And there's something that has a kind of a purity about that is really amazing when it works. And there's so many examples in here of how well that can work and how well it does work. So at any rate, I second all the project fellows too. I said jokingly to Julieanna once, you know, there must be some way we can get continuing education credit for this, because meeting all of these history makers and going through the interview process is a very enriching experience, or it has been for me, and I'm sure it must be for anyone that's part of it. And that's really how I think how and why all of us are here is seeing an opportunity to participate in that. And then why we're all here now is to really, you know, take another look back. We had this two years ago, when most of the people who were sitting here who weren't staff were potential interviewers, but people we hadn't really worked with. And I'm really pleased to see the development that's represented by the fact now that almost everyone here has worked with us and been part of doing interviews. So I think this is an amazing opportunity for us to kind of put our heads together and reflect and analyze and you know, ask questions of each other and you know, really kind of look forward to what we're going to do in the next year or two, and you know, how we're going to improve on what's already a very good process. As you know, Julie said, you know, when she was making the presentation with Howard Dodson, and people have recognized you know, what's here. So anyway, I probably talked too long, but that's a little bit about my background.
Okay, well, Oscar Wilde once said that brevity is the mother of wit, and who am I to quibble with Oscar Wilde? My name is Tracy Lewis. I'm a project fellow, and I just wanted to say that it's really fabulous to see all the faces in front of the voices I've been listening to for the past 9 months. And Shawn loved Elizabeth Catlett. Very awesome. Thank you. I started in January, the class of 2005, like many other people here. And one thing that has just floored me probably in coming here every day is as Barack Obama says, the audacity of hope of our history makers, who represent the vast spectrum of Black experience here in America. I'm constantly amazed at the things that people have gone through and accomplished in spite of all of the obstacles thrown in their way. So coming to work is an adventure. I get to travel across the globe just by sitting down in front of my computer. And I certainly value all of the experiences that all of you have brought to the table, and just learning where you come from and what you brought to the table is now, like, in an instant, made these past 9 months even more enriching, because I had really no idea of everyone's background. So I was like, wow, well, this person has a great voice, so let's keep listening. Briefly, my background, I graduated from Spelman long before probably half these people were born, but I look good. And I have my degree in English literature, and I've probably spent the majority of my time since graduating working at newspapers and writing books. So I'm working on my second one extremely slowly right now, but I'll finish that one when it gets finished. But I just want to again thank everyone for coming, and thank you for all that you've brought to the table. You've made this experience personally enriching. And oh wait, I forgot to mention, I have an oral history background too. Totally forgot. I actually worked on a project in Maine documenting the decline of the French-speaking community, which I found a real challenge, because a great challenge, because people didn't think that I would be able to have access to the community. Like, oh, well, you're Black, and it won't work. But as soon as I said, bonjour, madame, bonjour, monsieur, comment ça va? They're like, oh, êtes-vous haïtien? Are you Haitian? I was like, no, je suis américaine. Like, where'd you learn French? And just immediately. So it's really just an amazing thing that learning how to connect with other people and elicit their stories, it can be done. It can be done in a great way, and I think everyone here has demonstrated that. So, as my father once said, even a circle has an end.
Okay. I'm gonna make this quick. People have been talking for a while. But in the large scheme of things, I'm probably not important to a certain extent. I didn't say that to get old. Okay, my name is Frederick Adams. Everybody calls me Fred, but it's Frederick because that's what my mama called me. So this should say Frederick.
This is an important point too, because it makes an important cultural point. We were discussing it the other day in the hallway. Black people call each other by their full names, generally. There's some exceptions. But his name is Frederick, that's
or nickname.
And we had one of our staff members, young white guy who was just here, Edward. He was used to being called Ted, but he didn't tell anybody. So we called him Edward because that was his name. And he wondered why people didn't shorten him to Ted. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's a Black thing.
Go ahead on, Frederick.
Right.
My name, Frederick.
Okay, right. Okay, I'm archival assistant, which means I just basically make tapes, copies of tapes, DVDs, anything else that they ask me to do, like go to the grocery store. I'm a chauffeur, I do that, so I'm sort of like Morgan Freeman in Driving Miss Daisy. Somebody's going.
You are the oil that greases the wheels of the history. Without you, we would freeze.
What else am I supposed to? Okay, I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I majored in broadcast journalism. I've always liked film, and that was my dream to go into making movies or making pictures. But I went into television because I figured I could get a job in that. Motion pictures is tough to get a job, so I said, let me go for television. That's what I did. I actually saw a an ad for the HistoryMakers when I was in school, and I actually didn't do an internship. So I said, let me wait till I get a degree, then I'll be able to get a job. That's what I thought, but it didn't happen. So I was really unemployed for 2 years. I did like jury duty to make money. I meant to make it short, I'm sorry. But anyway, I'm here now, and that's cool. So
and we're glad to have you, Fred.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Morgan, and I am the new librarian/archivist for the collection here. And I have a long history of working in libraries from the time I was 9 years old, and I started the Millard, Nebraska Friends of the Library Club under the tutelage of then 90-year-old Miss Price, to whom all librarians today, I think we all owe her. I'm not sure what we owe her, but I think that she is the stereotype that we're all trying to live up to of the disciplinarian and the shusher. And no, I did not just get a master's degree in shushing, as all my friends say. I just got a master's degree in library science from Dominican University. And prior to coming to Chicago to get that degree, I worked in the Digital Library of Georgia. Also at the University of Georgia, I worked in the cataloging department. In the Digital Library of Georgia, the most recent project I talked briefly about last night was the Vanishing Georgia project, which I managed. We did that in conjunction with the Georgia Archives. So I've got some friends in the Georgia Archives. If anybody needs to talk to me about that, I can maybe point you in the direction of a few friendly people over there. But we digitized the collection of 18,000 historic Georgia photographs in 18 months. That culminated with the University of Georgia Library catching on fire, if anybody remembers that, with the whole collection inside. And it was rather a nightmare. But I think that working on the Vanishing Georgia project was the first time that I became very keenly aware of the fact that history is not always about what is collected, but it's often as much about what is collected and what is documented as it is about what is not documented and what is not there. And the Vanishing Georgia collection is very lacking, I would say, in, I don't want to say lacking, but I think the representations of African Americans in that collection, it's very limited, and a lot of it was limited from the very beginning by who was available to document this, who had cameras in the 1800s, who had the money to afford to have pictures of their family taken. And when pictures were taken, when there were images of African Americans, they were often stereotypes. And those images survive today, and we struggled a lot with putting this collection online and how to handle that, because there's no way to go back and fill in those gaps. I mean, those people that weren't photographed in their everyday lives, whose lives weren't documented in any way, we can't go back and we can't go back and get that information now. And it was tragic to me, I think, as I worked on that. And how do we represent this now when we're digitizing this collection and putting it online, when supposedly this is a document of Georgia's past? I feel like that needed to be accompanied with some information that said this is not a complete document. I think people a lot of times take photographic evidence for being, that's the truth, that's how it was, and oftentimes, as I said, it's as much about what isn't there. And archives and history is created from these materials, and everybody along the way that touches these materials and these collections from the beginning, from the family that saved the photograph, that took the photograph, or takes the images, or saves the letters, all the way to today. Everybody adds a layer as it goes along with choices that they make. And as I said, I think I became keenly aware of that as I worked on that project. And so I think this is an awesome way to do something proactive today, to make sure that in the future we have a more rounded view of history.
Amen.
I don't know if I said that very articulately, but
Very clear.
I'm Foster Stenson. I came out here from California. I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, and joined the military, the Air Force, and considered making it a career, but as it happens, I was asked to work with civilian engineers who came out to the base to help us maintain this radar. And they were discussing how much money they were making. So when my tour duty was up, I decided to get out and go into private industry. First job was with Aerojet General Corporation in Azusa, California. And then worked with them for 2 years, and then went to Honolulu with Lockheed Aircraft Service. And maintaining the same radar equipment that we were responsible for in the Air Force. And then I was there in Honolulu for about 2 years, 2.5 years, and then came back to the mainland and decided to continue work in private industry. And ended up in Denver, Colorado with the Martin Company, the Titan missile program. And when that program was phased out, we were given a choice to come back to California, or go back to California, or go to New York. And I decided to go to New York, where I worked with Grumman Aircraft Company. First on a defense system, EA-6A aircraft weapon systems. And then I made the transition into the Apollo program. And when that contract phased out, I then joined IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees in New York. And that's when I met Huey Quinier's daughter, and we got married. The New York minute. And I literally had to get out of Dodge because that relationship was so bad. But we produced a beautiful daughter, who's now an attorney. And so I left New York, went back to California, where I decided to attend Stanford University. Finished there in '75. And decided to go to Europe to study French while at the university. And I shared a house with John O. Franklin's son while there. And so we talked about African history. St. Clair Drake was one of my professors at Stanford. But my major was communications, emphasis on television and film. And minored in French and political science. And I met this lady, and we got married, and I helped her through medical school. We both finished Stanford. And then we left California to go to Michigan, where she was accepted to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And so we were there for about 3 years while she was doing her medical school training. But she was having difficulties with one of her sons. She had 3 kids from a previous marriage. So she thought it best to get back to California to try to help out with that. So we transferred back to California, where she ended up finishing at UC San Francisco. And I worked while in Michigan, I worked for the ABC station in Detroit, WXYZ, as a news photographer. We were using Ikegami cameras. And then when we went back to California, I took a job with KGO, the ABC station there, and then decided that I would join the local in San Francisco, Local 16. And that worked out very nicely because there was a lot of traveling involved and a lot of money to be made. Because we had companies like Microsoft, Oracle, Sun Microsystems that were giving us plenty of work to do. My sister arranged for me to meet Julieanna, and so I like the philosophy of this program, and I'm looking forward to really getting involved.
Neculai? Yep. My name is Neculai Burghelea, And originally I come from Romania. I came to the U.S. about 20 years ago. I went to NYU, got a degree in film and television, and I've been doing freelance videography for about 10 years or so. And among the many projects I worked on was the show of Visual History Foundation, which Julieanna mentioned. I worked for them for more than 5 years and as a videographer and interviewer. And I'm glad to be part of this project. It will give me a chance to learn more about essential part of American history that I'm not all that familiar with.
My name is Adrian Jackson. I'm a videographer out of Atlanta, Georgia. Backgrounds in radio, television, and film.
My name is Janelle Jennings. I am the regional coordinator for Atlanta Southeast. My degree is in English from Florida A&M University. Unlike most people here, my worst subject has always been history. And I've always said, oh God, I can sense awful. But I think how this project to me has kind of endeared itself is that I see the educational value, and my tendency towards education has really drawn me towards it. So I have a lot of great ideas that I won't share right now because I've been told to be very brief, so we'll talk about it later.
Hi, my name is Wendy Giangiorgi. I'm the new Director of Education here. I graduated in 2004 from Northwestern with a BA in American Studies, and I'm currently getting my Master's in Education.
Oh, we're skipping. Okay.
No, we're not skipping.
You're the last one. We're done. Oh. My name is Ben Mayer. I graduated Columbia College in 2000, and I've been freelancing as both a shooter and editor until I landed a job here last December. So I've been full-time editor ever since here, and I work on the fundraisers for the Evening with series. And if there's any other, things that come up that they need done, such as the Harvard presentation happening on the 15th, I put that together with, the different things that some of you guys might have had a chance to shoot. I string that all together and present that to people. So, all right, I'm gonna shut up.
Okay, thanks everyone. So at least you can't say you haven't had a chance to get to know each other. From this point on, I'd ask Ivy for us to, no, I thought that was the only one, but